Join On the Other Hand today for this.
I believe that politicians become lured by the power and the wealth of the position, and that this significantly affects their votes and the decisions that they make every day.
Christian nationalism is at its core sexist, racist, homophobic, and paranoid with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's really the antithesis of everything Jesus taught.
This is On the Other Hand. A podcast sponsored by Braver Angels Arkansas, where hope and common ground meet.
Each episode features community leaders from Arkansas and beyond, sharing stories and insights on how we can strengthen our relationships and our communities together, and in doing so, discover what's possible.
In the first part of our conversation with Sherry Simon and Britt Skarda, they explained why they and others in Central Arkansas have been participating in weekly demonstrations outside the Little Rock office of 2nd District Congressman French Hill. Now, let's hear the second part of our conversation with Sherry and Britt. Okay, let's since you're talking about Congressman Hill, let's talk about him specifically for a bit. What are some of the issues where you have the strongest disagreement with him on, and why do you have those disagreements? What are the concerns that you have?
Well, Congressman Hill's support for the Big Beautiful Bill will be financially devastating for millions of Americans. The loss of health insurance, the loss of funding for programs like Medicaid and food assistance, rollbacks of clean energy incentives, and his alignment with far-right groups like the Heritage Foundation that produced Project 2025 are designed to dismantle our nation as we've known it for 250 years. Also, his efforts to curtail the power of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, that's CFPB, that provides an invaluable service to Americans in terms of consumer protection, threatens us and our health and well-being.
Sherry?
Yes, there are areas where I do agree with Congressman Hill. However, what I see happening in Congress is that Republicans have allowed this administration to run over them without any pushback in areas where I am sure that Congressman Hill has concern. And like Britt, I want to take the Big Beautiful Bill, for example. Although there were certainly a few changes made in the House and Senate, that bill was pushed through without resistance from Republicans, including Congressman Hill. For example, there are billions of dollars allocated for the expansion of the immigration detention system and the creation of new high fees for asylum and work permits. There were billions of dollars cut from international humanitarian aid like USAID. I did not see Representative Hill do anything to better designate where our tax dollars were going to go and what they were or were not going to fund. Yes, the system is broken, but it is how we fix it that is a measure of who we are as a people.
Okay, Sherry. How about this one? If you had a chance to persuade Representative Hill to change his priorities or his voting record or establishing different policies, what actions would you like to see from him instead? What are the positive alternatives you want to urge him to undertake?
Well, realistically, Glenn, I don't begin to think that I understand the ins and outs of politics well enough to guide him, but I do know that I would weight policies that address the needs of those in our country and in our world who are unable to provide for themselves or live sustainably. As I said earlier, I believe it is the governance responsibility to put as first priority the welfare of its people. I would ask him to promote with his colleagues and his administration a healthy immigration system. I would also like to see him discontinue the politics of division that is so prominent in our administration. French Hill plays out the blame game on Democrats in his ads these days, and I think that's beneath him. I would like to see him work with Democrats and Republicans to come up with policies that work best for our country and our state. Now, I'm not naive. Unfortunately, I do believe that he would be punished by the administration for doing this. So I recognize that he's in a very difficult position, but I still expect him to do better.
One thing that strikes me about that is you're right. That I think a lot of people are running afraid of being punished. It occurs to me that for all our nation's history, we have asked our armed forces to defend the Constitution, even to the point of risking life or limb. And I don't know that that's a risk for people in Congress. So I think it's legitimate to consider the extent to which they're willing to make sacrifices for the good of the country, whatever party they're in. So, Britt, what about you on this question? What are some positive alternatives you'd like to see from Representative Hill?
It sounds like I'm beating the same drum over and over, but I would love to see increased taxes on for higher wage earners. This should be a nation where all citizens contribute. We do not need a society of privileged oligarchs. I'd like to see more support for the working class. Congressman Hill's policies are not benefiting the average Arkansan. I would love to see him supporting a higher federal minimum wage and more robust social programs that help our citizens right here at home. Honestly, I would like to see honesty and transparency as the major guideline in policy, not only for Congressman Hill, but for all members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats alike.
What have you guys noticed in your observation of the protesters who you join on a weekly basis in front of Representative Hill's office? What have you observed about their motivations, their character? Tell us if these are the far left radical lunatics that we've heard about.
These protesters are everyday citizens who love their country and who have given their lives in service to make it a better place. They're veterans, school teachers, small business owners, laborers, doctors, lawyers, farmers, clergy, therapists, and I can go on and on. And like myself, many of them are out there wanting to protect the future of their children and their grandchildren, and their willingness to protest every Thursday for 9 consecutive months now is for me a testimonial to their character and their commitment to a better world.
Sherry?
Britt, I agree with you completely. It's such an easy question because we have had these 9 months to get to know these folks. We've had those conversations out there on the sidewalk. You would be hard pressed to find a group of people who love their country more than these folks. Although most of them are older, maybe in their 60s and up, we have more and more young people coming to join us every week. This group is intelligent, they're well informed. From our conversations, I can tell you that they share determination, an understanding that our country's values are disintegrating, a desire to ensure that this country is safe for their children and grandchildren. I hear that a lot. They want a country safe for their children and grandchildren, and they have a patriotism and a love for the Constitution that is awesome. And despite the fact that we've been coming out here weekly for over 9 months, they continue to state that they will come for as long as it takes for our representatives to act on our message. They're not giving up.
I learned that Robert's Rules of Order for conducting meetings always starts with the same thing, and it is the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. Do you know why Roberts did that? Because he thought there would be value in beginning any conversation with agreement, and nobody ever disagrees with the previous minutes. In light of that, are there some areas where you think there, I don't know, opportunities for collaboration or compromise or even agreement with Representative Hill? Sherry?
As I mentioned earlier, I do believe that there has been some waste in our government for many years, bloat, and that the various federal agencies need to be managed more efficiently. I'm sure that Representative Hill would agree with that. However, I'm not happy with him as he has at least tacitly supported this chainsaw approach to the problem. I wish that he would collaborate with folks who aren't in lockstep with the administration. I find Congressman Hill to historically be a very intelligent, reasonable man. Sadly, working with anyone who doesn't have the administration's agenda seems to be forbidden. So I'm not sure that he would be able, in his current position, to compromise on these issues and find a different way to dealing with government inefficiency.
That's fascinating just to hear you pause where you did and say not able to compromise. Britt, your thoughts on that?
Yes, Congressman Hill has a history of working across the aisle with Democrats in areas like international policy and financial regulation and criminal justice. And he's done some really fine work in efforts to reform federal housing policy to make affordable housing possible for all Americans. Leadership is important. And right now, he finds himself under a leader who intimidates and punishes. And I feel there's not the freedom to stand up and really reflect who he truly is.
Could I just say that you say there's not the freedom? Could it also be said that there is the freedom, but there might be the fear of consequences? Because that has to be taken into account.
That's probably better stated. Yes, I would agree. The fear of consequences.
And maybe if the consequence for a member of Congress that they fear the most is not being reelected, does that not put back on the table the topic of election terms? Oh, well, that's not for today. If Congressman Hill were here today with us, what questions would you ask him? What do you think you most want him to understand? Britt?
Um, I would I would like to ask Congressman Hill if he earnestly believes the path we are on today with this administration aligns with the values he was taught. Are they in line with the moral code he received through his faith tradition? And will the actions of this administration truly make America great again? I would also like to ask him if he feels he's representing policies that will assure a better future, not only for his own children and grandchildren, but for all children everywhere.
And if he answered you honestly without you repeating it, would you be happy with that?
That remains to be seen.
Okay. Sherry, your thought?
Right. Well, I have a feeling that it wouldn't be politically wise for Congressman Hill to answer my questions because my questions wouldn't be politically but morally based. Representative Hill is a Catholic, and I have known him in the past, historically, to be a person who believes and acts in accordance with Catholic social teachings. I do wonder if he considers the moral implications of the current administration's act on so many issues. And I could go on forever, but for example, again, the aggressive deportation policies that destroy families, the murder without apparent evidence of boatmen in international waters, the death of millions of people in other nations who depend upon humanitarian aid from the United States, the increasing divide between the wealthy and the poor in our country, the chaotic slashing of federal agencies, and so on ad infinitum. These, along with the hateful rhetoric and gross communications from the administration, are what we protest. And I would want him to understand that that is why we're out there. These flagrant behaviors that go against everything that America is supposed to stand for.
Britt?
I want to note that Congressman Hill was 35 House Republicans who voted with Democrats to develop the bipartisan commission to investigate the January 6th insurrection. This took great courage on his part, and I would like to encourage him to find that courage again and use it for the good.
Okay, we're talking a lot about Representative Hill, kind of holding his feet to the fire. It sounds like what you guys are doing. And I think it's important for us to recognize that politicians in general, including Congressman Hill, they face very difficult jobs in what they're doing. And those jobs often require compromises beyond what they would personally choose. So, given that, how do you see the role of compromise playing itself out in political leadership and how he might accomplish that? Sherry?
Well, Glenn, I believe that Congressman Hill has an almost impossible job these days. I think that productive politics absolutely requires compromise. And it appears to me that this is not happening these days. It is not allowed. I believe that good government is based on the art of good compromise, relationships with those of varying ideas. None of that is allowed by this administration, only loyalty to one person and that person's agenda. This disturbs me, as the only way that I think we can move forward in a healthy way is through free discussion of ideas. Compromise is the only path of growth that I see for our nation.
Britt?
I agree. Compromise is the key to a healthy, functioning democracy, period. Several years ago, I had the privilege of hearing the late Senator David Pryor speak at a luncheon held at my church. And I recall his stories of crossing the political aisle, Republicans and Democrats working side by side for the greater good. And at the end of the day, going out to dinner together to celebrate those things they agreed upon. Without compromise, democracy is dead.
So you talk about all the difficulties, the basically almost impossible job that Congressman Hill faces in the current environment where compromise is not valued or arguably in many cases even allowed. And we've talked about the potential consequences of going against your party. So at what point do you think a politician has an obligation to push back on their own party, even if it costs them personally? If they believe it's crossed an ethical, moral, or constitutional line, when do they push back? What should they do? Sherry?
I believe that if a politician is going to represent their constituency and have the honor of serving, that it is their obligation to push back on their party immediately when moral, ethical, or constitutional lines are crossed. However, I know that this decision is very complicated for politicians in these days, and I'm sure in the past as well. Politicians do not always serve only for the good of their country. Representation has become a job that holds so much power and wealth for the politician. I believe that politicians become lured by the power and the wealth of the position, and that this significantly affects their votes and the decisions that they make every day. And so I have to say that I agree with the comment that John made earlier. I think we should consider the importance of term limits and decreasing the amount of money and influence that these politicians have so that they can better and more honestly represent their constituency.
Okay. How about you, Britt?
My response is quite similar. Congressman Hill was elected to represent his constituency, which is the 2nd District here in Arkansas. And in my opinion, if Congressman Hill or any other representative or senator sees the decisions being made by their party as having an adverse effect on their constituency and they do nothing about it, then an ethical, moral, and constitutional line has been breached. And this is our dilemma today. Many of our elected officials are turning their heads and not speaking up on behalf of the very people who elected them.
It seems that both of you are deeply involved with religious communities. So, from that perspective, how do you see the spiritual and moral challenges facing our society today?
I'll go ahead with that. I think that the spiritual and moral challenges for our world are immense. I think there's a vacuum in our world in regards to spiritual and moral teachings. And I have found particularly that young people are hungry for spiritual connection because our society is one that promotes individualism, wealth, and power as the highest aspiration. We do not have enough models for loving kindness, simple community, care for the earth, or love of our neighbor. And I'll reiterate, I think there's a vacuum there that must be filled if we are going to move forward in a healthy manner.
Thanks. Britt, what do you think?
The divisions we see in our political system today are unfortunately also present within our families and our various faith communities. In many instances, our houses of worship have become battlegrounds. Within my tradition, Christianity, there is a great divide. And using the terminology of my own Christian tradition, there are many different gospels being preached today, not all of which are focused on the greater good.
Then, how do you view the moral or spiritual contributions of, say, atheists, agnostics, or non Christians in public life?
As a member of the board of directors for the Interfaith Center of Arkansas, many of my most meaningful interactions and inspirations come from my friendships and conversations with my friends from other faith tradition, as well as those who come from no faith tradition at all. The golden rule, also called the ethic of reciprocity, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is integral to virtually every major religion and every philosophy on this planet. This might be a starting point for healing our houses of worship and our nation as well.
And Sherry, how about you with regards to spiritual contributions of, say, generally non-religious associated thinking?
First of all, I want to start with what I believe, and that is that everyone on this planet is born a child of our Creator. There are no differences. And I've known many non-Christians, atheists, and agnostics, some of whom are my best friends, who have contributed greatly to the welfare of our country and our world. And interestingly, they don't do this because they're afraid of punishment or going to hell. They do it from a wellspring that comes right out of their heart. And I've also realized over time that all people who have truly done their inner work, or who we might call them woke today, these people share common values that promote the welfare of all. That's universal, and this is irrespective of specific religions. You can find that in everyone.
Okay, to stay a little longer on this religious angle of thinking, there's been a lot of conversation about the influence of what we call Christian nationalism on our country's policies and culture. How do you see its role and its impact today, Sherry?
I certainly believe that Christian nationalism has had a significant and negative impact on our politics as well as our culture. I believe that this focus on our country being specifically blessed by God and using that belief to rationalize that our country has specific privileges and has a right to have power over others is nothing less than idolatry. We harm in this generation many in the name of God, just like has been done over the centuries. And I believe that there are many people who hide behind the face of God to do very destructive things in our world.
Britt, Christian nationalism.
In my opinion, there is nothing Christian or American about American Christian nationalism. At its core, it's a political ideology that is aimed at fusing a certain brand of extremist Christianity with national and civic life. National Christian nationalism is at its core sexist, racist, homophobic, and paranoid with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's really the antithesis of everything Jesus taught.
What gives you both hope about where Arkansas and our country might be headed? Britt?
Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." In order to heal our nation, we must embrace the truth and do what is right and just for our nation and its people, all of our people. And I believe this can be achieved here in Arkansas and beyond. The recent No Kings protest march was very encouraging. It brought together people from every walk of life to celebrate our American heritage of freedom and justice for all.
What gives me hope about this is looking back on history, because there always seems to be a rebound effect that occurs when we find ourselves in dark times such as these. Britt's example of the No Kings March across the country, which was the largest protest in the history of our nation, is a great example of that. Here we have all of these destructive policies, from my view, but we have an uprising of people showing their values, but doing it in a way that is so communal and displays the values. They don't just talk about them. We've seen this constantly throughout history. After World War II, we saw an uprising of morality and people who realized where they had gone wrong, back in the 30s and 40s. This can happen again. And I think that during this period of our country's increased racism, bigotry, hatred, disrespect for the rule of law, that we are going to find a way. And I almost said a way back. I'm not sure we've ever really been there, but we will find a way, I believe, to a path of civil discourse and respect for the dignity of every human person, the ability to compromise, and ultimately to remember how to love our neighbor.
One last thing for me. What recommendations would each of you give to our listeners who might want to make a difference in their communities, whether it's about this specific, congressman or the politics or just in general being a positive force in the community? What do you suggest?
Do something. Just do something. Protest, write letters, call your senator and representative, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, tutor disadvantaged school children in the midst of what I see as an inhumane administration. Show your community and the world that you care. Be an example to others. Bottom line.
Britt and I are constantly on the same page. And I have just one simple thought to add to that. We certainly cannot wait for our leaders to lead us out of these problems. We have to make our own future. Justice, I believe, is achieved by forming equitable relationships with one another. And each of us can do that every day. We can't wait. We have to connect with others who share our values, make a community of these people, move forward, and grow that community by treating one another with the respect that each person deserves. We can model that every day of our lives, and that will make a huge difference.
Britt, when you said do something, I thought I'd throw something in from personal experience. Twice in my career, I have had as teammates people who were congressional aides in their past. And I was shocked to hear each of them, independent of each other, tell me, oh, yeah, sometimes one or two letters can change the views and the votes of a congressperson. I said, you're kidding. They said, no, they have so much to read. There's no possible way they could form their own opinions on every issue. And they rely on those congressional aides. And those are the folks who read your letters.
My my spouse is not able to go to the protest every Thursday, but she is writing postcards not only to our Arkansas congresspersons, but all over the country. And she's part of an organization, and they mail them the first of every month. And so they arrive in mass, and it is making a difference. Amen.
So, if you could leave our listeners with one practice or a piece of wisdom for building better relationships across divides, what would it be, Sherry?
It would be to listen to others before offering their perspective. We are all so upset by the manufactured conflicts that exist between us, and we all feel that we have the right and the correct answer to solve the problem. And so we're mad by any other answers because they must be wrong. This is so manufactured. We haven't seen any problem solved by one side or the other. At least I haven't in my lifetime. But I believe our biggest error is in destroying the relationships with these conflicts, treating one another with less respect than deserved. Let's get back to civility and kindness and patience towards one another. Let's figure out a way to work together again towards common goals.
Thank you. A piece of wisdom from Britt. How do we get that compromise back across divides, in your opinion?
Well, my advice echoes Sherry's advice. Recognize the humanity of those with whom you disagree and realize there's power in just loving our neighbor, no matter what their political or social stance. This is a starting point for healing relationships as well as the divide that exists in our nation today.
I'd like to interject one thought too, in terms of a piece of wisdom that I've kind of accumulated. I've heard all my life about community, and I've recently begun to get I think, a more clear understanding of what that's about. If you can do something with a group of people that you don't know because you have some sort of common interest or common thread, maybe it's because you go to church together, maybe you decide to belong to a chess club or, kickball, whatever it is. When you're around people that you don't know, you develop relationships. And the biggest healing factor we have is relationships. In relationships, you learn that people are humans, and they may be disagreeing with you on some things, but they're mostly decent people that you don't have problems with. That kind of building up of a community and an appreciation of people who think and vote differently from you aren't evil is really critical right now. So I would add that as well.
We've shared a great deal of information here, but I certainly want to hand the microphone back to you and say, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share that maybe we haven't covered with our questions today? Sherry?
Yes, and I actually want to take it back to what Glenn just added about the importance of relationships and community, and not just the idea of community, but the experience of community, because that has been my experience in Pax Christi. Learning over time people's stories and the details of their lives and what they've been through, their vulnerabilities allows me to be vulnerable to them. And that vulnerability is what creates intimacy and community among us. And we have to have that. In these days, it is not safe to be vulnerable. You cannot, at least politically, be yourself out there and say what you really think because you will be harmed. And I believe that that inability to be vulnerable in this very dangerous society is tearing us apart. It prevents community. It prevents us from trusting one another. And we have to make, if we're going to make our country anything, we have to make our country safe again to be just a regular human and not have to be the perfect in lockstep person with a leader who thinks he's going in the right direction, but is actually destroying this country.
Britt, any final thoughts from you, sir?
It's obvious currently our democracy, the oldest democracy on the planet, is in something of a fragile condition and teetering on the edge. And so my word would just be, don't stand idly by waiting for someone else to fix it. I mean, each and every one of us must be engaged in the process. So get out there, write, do whatever it takes to make your voice heard. Don't forget to pray, but follow it up with action.
Folks, it has been a joy talking to you. Thank you so much for your measured, thoughtful, but frank comments. We appreciate your being here for us.
It's an honor.
It was a pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed this second part of our conversation with Sherry Simon and Britt Skarda, and that their story gave you a little more hope and a reminder that we can do good things together.
If you liked what you heard, share the episode with a friend and help us spread stories of bridge building across Arkansas. And remember that On the Other Hand offers dozens of other interviews like this one. You can find our On the Other Hand podcast inside your favorite podcast app or on the podcast page of the Braver Angels Arkansas website at arkansas.braverangels.org.
Music was composed by Randall Standridge of Jonesboro, Arkansas, and was performed by the University of Northern Colorado Symphonic Band, Dr. Richard Main, conductor. From your hosts, John O'Brien
and Glenn White,
join us in working to make our relationships and communities better.